people are doing. So this is quite possibly one of my most favorite and treasured formats of camera comparisons. It's where we pit an underdog, a flagship killer, the OnePlus 13, against the S25 Ultra. Now, here's the deal. The OnePlus 13, obviously, huge value for money, no one's doubting that. But the S25 Ultra, a lot of people do believe, maybe rightfully so, to an extent at least, that the S25 Ultra is overpriced. Is it? Well, it could be, quite possibly, depending on the perspective. It can very easily come across as overpriced. But the fact is simple. When it comes to camera performance, specifically photography performance, that is after all the whole point of a camera comparison, right? Well, a lot of things do depend not just on hardware but also the nuances of software. How well can either of these phones balance the software to take the best advantage of the hardware? That's the whole point. So let's jump in and see exactly if OnePlus 13 can prove that you don't need to spend like $1,200 to get a good camera. And so jumping right in, let me just address the elephant in the room. Quite simply, the OnePlus 13 does have, technically speaking, a custom color profile. If you use the Pro mode, it essentially uses these Hasselblad Pro colors. I've tested it out, I've seen what it can do, and I don't like it. Simple as that. It is actually for a different comparison that I haven't even made yet, but we'll get to that in a later date. But the fact is simple. I've seen exactly what these Hasselblad colors are like. They're nice, but the problem is you don't get almost any proper dynamic range when you use the Pro mode. It's one of the weird oversights that we have here. One of the good things is actually you can have complete control over the sharpness on the OnePlus 13 if you use Pro mode. But again, no dynamic range is no bueno for me. So with the S25 Ultra, as you can probably tell, this isn't the auto color profile that we have. The auto color profile kind of sucks balls, in my opinion at least, because it is just so bland and boring. It's got too much saturation and too little contrast. But that's exactly what I've fixed. You can create your custom color profile on the S25 Ultra. It is now available in auto mode. It was always available in Pro mode, once again, just getting that clear. But the fact is simple. With the custom color profiles, I've bumped up the contrast a little, I've lowered the overall saturation just a pinch. As you may have noticed already, one thing that does stick out more than anything else is that yes, the S25 Ultra has much more natural saturation, it has a good bit more contrast. The OnePlus 13's auto color profile is fantastic, just so you know. Like, to be entirely honest, even if I could change every aspect about the OnePlus 13's color profile, I probably wouldn't, because it turns out beautiful photos. And believe me when I say that's not a compliment I give to every device out there. There are very few that deserve it, and the OnePlus 13 does, most definitely. But another thing you may have noticed is that the S25 Ultra, as usual, is washing out all of the warmth from the image. It neutralizes things too much, it removes the natural warmth from the image, and at the end ends up looking less color accurate as opposed to the OnePlus 13, which is just sad. And then of course you've got our classic backlit images, and honestly both are performing tremendously. One thing you'll notice is that yes, the S25 Ultra does tend to have a little bit more contrast, which I do like, but it's a personal preference. You could very easily go for the OnePlus 13 and it won't be a problem. But however, here's the deal. You may be noticing that the saturation and the color accuracy is very good on both phones. It's almost identical. The OnePlus does have a little bit more shadow detail, so it might appear a little bit more saturated, but that's not really the case. The overall color tones, very natural on both. But here's the thing. The reason we have such nice color accuracy on the S25 this time around is because we are not shooting in warm lighting. It's very neutral, almost white light from the sun. This was sometime in the afternoon, so we didn't really have warm sunlight, and therefore it can handle itself really well. So that white balance issue is actually something that only exists in warm lighting specifically. If you don't shoot in warm lighting and if you're sure that you won't care about warmth being taken out of your images, then actually the S25 Ultra is plenty good when it comes to color accuracy. However, when it comes to the ultra-wide cameras, look, it's very simple. The OnePlus 13 is able to handle its contrast and clarity so beautifully that it looks stunning, to be entirely honest. Like, especially when you have images like these where there's a lot of minute detail that needs to be brought out to really look splendid. Well, the OnePlus 13 will get you there. With the S25 Ultra, this is with a boost in contrast, and we're just not getting nearly enough of that happening here. Now, I could jack up the contrast even more, but I feel like that would just crush shadows or blow out highlights even more, which obviously not something we want. So yeah, this just comes down to how well balanced the processing can be, and by far the OnePlus 13 is pulling ahead, like by a huge margin at this point. At least for me personally, the colors on the OnePlus 13 look so much better that I couldn't even dream about using the S25 Ultra at this point. Then of course we have the macro mode situation. Now see this. This is where it's almost like a scandal that we've got going on here. Let me explain. So on the S25 Ultra, you have ultra-wide macro photography, which is not the best out there, as you can probably tell, because it's using the ultra-wide camera. It doesn't look as nice, it doesn't have as much natural detail, there's some sharpening, lots of processing, noise reduction artifacts that we can very clearly see, especially in the shadows. But then on the OnePlus 13, you get a 3x zoom. Now the fact is this, the 3x telephoto camera on the OnePlus 13 is completely and utterly incapable of macro photography. So what do you think this 3x is? It is a digital crop from the main camera. I mean, that it never sits right with me. Like I've talked about this in I think one camera comparison prior to this, but man, it is just horrendous. Like how can you just zoom into 3x after you click on the macro button and just have a digital crop like that? That's not a macro shot. Plain and simple, this is not how macro photography should ever work. And so simply because of that, the S25 Ultra takes a massive lead in this regard. Like without a question, the OnePlus 13 is basically incapable of proper macro photography. And the fact that it goes about this digital crop route, it's honestly shameless. But anyways, by far I would say that the OnePlus 13 has pretty much been pulling ahead. At least in my opinion, the OnePlus 13's photography, regular photography with the main and the ultra-wide cameras, way better than the S25 Ultra's result. When it comes to zoom, things might be different. So with this 2x sensor crop, we are cropping all the way in as usual to 500%, and yet the S25 Ultra is significantly better. I mean, this is not even a comparison at this point. The 2x sensor crop is so much more detailed than the OnePlus 13, it doesn't even look like it's worth comparing. And that is quite something, especially given the fact that the S25 Ultra is lagging behind so severely. For the more expensive device, that's really bad, and the fact that it's pulling ahead, there's a small semblance of hope here. Then of course the 3x. Now see, the 3x is a bit problematic on the S25 because it is one of the trashiest 3x telephotos that we've got on the planet. It's honestly the worst part about the S25 Ultra. And when we crop in, it's plenty obvious that the S25 Ultra, I mean, you saw how good the detail preservation can be with the main camera when it has good hardware, and then this is what happens when you have one of the worst and lowest quality sensors with the 3x telephoto. The OnePlus 13 is by no means exceptional, but it's significantly better than what the S25 is producing here. But then of course, what about 5x? You see, 5x is something that the S25 actually has in terms of optical zoom. The OnePlus 13 does not, so I think we know how this is gonna go down. Now, well, just as expected, the S25 is pulling ahead. I mean, I sincerely doubt anyone expected anything less. Now, the OnePlus 13 does kind of push you towards a 6x sensor crop as if it's going to work out plenty well. It really does not. The detail preservation is not nearly good enough to actually have a dedicated toggle to 6x. However, we are not done with the details yet because now we have high resolution. So, this right here, 50 megapixels on both. And I gotta say, the colors look whacked out on both. I don't even remember what the exact colors were. I didn't really pay attention enough to it. But man, they are drastically different. But of course, we are here just for the details. So let's crop into 500%, and well, it's interesting. So the OnePlus 13 does have more contrast as usual, and because of that, because of the higher clarity as well, it brings out some of the finer details, especially if you look at some of the designs in white. It kind of brings that out a little bit better, but I do believe there's more sharpening going on the OnePlus 13. The S25 on the other hand kind of goes for a more natural approach, although there is a good bit of grain and noise action in there as well, which is not a good sign obviously. So in essence, it's a different approach that we have on both, but neither is doing a particularly blockbuster job. But then of course the S25 Ultra does come in with 200 megapixels, which, believe it or not, until quite recently, it wasn't really worth using. So it's really nice to see that the 200 megapixels actually means something finally. Now, you do get skyrocketed amounts of detail now as opposed to the 50 megapixel mode, which is exactly what it should be doing, but we still have the noise and the weird artifacts in there, which is kind of sad. Now here's another huge upgrade on the S25 Ultra. So what we had previously, just imagine for a second, is a trash ultra wide and a trash 3x. Now we only have a trashy 3x, which kind of sad that they don't change it yet, but well, here's the deal. we get a much higher quality ultra-wide camera now. And well, the OnePlus 13 most definitely does have better dynamic range, but let's crop in and find out if it actually has more details. And I would say most definitely not, because the S25 has so much more detail going on. This is very impressive, by the way. This is exactly the kind of thing that I would expect from a Galaxy device, from such an expensive Galaxy device, more than anything else. And then of course high res with the telephoto cameras. Now, the reason the S25 Ultra is cropped in more is because we are using the 5x. 3x isn't worth comparing, we already saw how horrible it was, and it doesn't have high res either. So we're comparing the 5x, which does have an optical zoom advantage, against the OnePlus 13's high res with 3x. And see, while I was taking the shot, I thought we might have the S25 pulling ahead by a long shot, but it would appear that there's this constant motion blur issue that I ran into. It could be because technically I guess the light wasn't all that high when I took this shot, but I still don't understand why the 4 or 5 shots that I took on the S25, all of them had some degree of motion blur. This is the least amount of motion blur that I could capture, and that says a lot. Yeah, despite the fact that the S25 could have pulled ahead had it taken a normal proper shot, the OnePlus 13 does. Alright, then that brings us to selfies. So here's the thing, I'm not the biggest fan of either one of these, mainly because the S25 Ultra, yes, it has really nice detail preservation, but it does have a tendency to do a little bit of smoothing with your face even though everything is turned off. It also has a tendency to give you flat results, especially with your skin tones. Like your skin itself or your face itself will end up looking kind of flat. And the last nail in the coffin is that it does not have a wider field of view. Generally, that is one of the biggest things that I dislike about the S25, because I anyways don't like taking selfies, and even if I do, I'd prefer my camera to be as far away from my face as possible. Now on the OnePlus 13, things are a little bit different because it does have a wider field of view, which is good, but you'll also notice that it does not have nearly as much detail, especially if you look at my shirt. Now, another issue that didn't really happen as much in all of the selfies and selfie portraits that I managed to take this time around, but it does happen quite a lot, is that the OnePlus 13 will basically make a cutout of your face and brighten it up. It'll look like a shoddy Photoshop job that does not work out, that does not look nice in the slightest. And I've had that problem quite a few times previously, and it is one of the reasons why I don't consider the OnePlus 13 selfie cameras to be worth a single dime. But well, in this case at least, secluded to this specific camera comparison, I would say it is performing fairly well, but it is still kind of lacking in detail. So with that said, let's head back to the rear cameras, this time with portraits. So here's the deal. Both phones are not bad in this regard. And weirdly enough, neither of these phones actually provide any 35mm options when it comes to portraits. Honestly, 35mm has been one of my all-time favorites, mainly because it gives you a little bit of a crop. It still looks really nice, still looks wide enough that you can incorporate a lot of the background, but 35mm portraits just give you so much better composition overall. But well, the one good thing is that both phones do have really nice 50mm portraits. The S25 can be kind of flat, and I am noticing now, after all this time, that somehow the OnePlus 13's portrait shot was not 50mm all along. Or is it? I don't know, I feel like the framing is 50mm, but maybe I'm standing too far away or something like that. I don't know, there's some framing problems going on here and I didn't notice it, so my apologies for that. But well, what I can tell you is that the S25's look, the portrait that it's producing, is way too flat and it does not look as good. And then we have 3x. Now, one of the problems that we have on the S25 Ultra, and this is similar to the issue that we saw with the 2x or the 50mm portrait, is that it will almost always try to give you a very flat result. It just does not make any sense to me because I want the contours of my face and my posture and everything else to be brought out, not flattened out. And the same does go for the 5x on the S25 Ultra. It's fantastic that we have 5x portraits, but the problem is that the 5x portraits have always had this weird inconsistency where they will flatten things out too much. Now, it didn't happen once again in this comparison. It has happened previously, and it is a weird inconsistency that will always haunt me because sometimes 5x portraits turn out looking really nice on the S25. Other times they're going to look like a log profile or something. And then finally, night portraits. Now, you might be thinking, well, this doesn't look like night mode. Believe me, it was way darker than what these phones are producing. Both phones, needless to say, have really good night portraits. That's the takeaway here. Now, I do think that some of the highlights on my face are more blown out on the OnePlus 13 as opposed to the S25 Ultra, but outside of that, it's honestly not that bad. It looks quite nice on both. And so with that in mind, let us now tackle night mode because this is where things are going to be very interesting. So, As you can probably tell, both phones do seem to have quite a nice and natural approach in most cases. What I mean by that is that both phones don't tend to overexpose or give you overly bright results when it comes to night mode. Especially if you look at the night skies, it looks really good. Now, a good bit of that could be because we are taking these shots at Dubai Mall, which has a lot of lights inherently, so essentially the night mode will naturally not try to overexpose or overbrighten things. That could be the case, but by far the overall consistency of the OnePlus 13 is what impresses me more than anything else. The S25 Ultra, sometimes it did end up producing a really saturated and weirdly brightened night sky, which is concerning, but I can tell you this much, having used the S25 Ultra for a fair bit of time now, the S25's night mode has gotten way more natural. It is far more usable now than ever before, which is quite a compliment given how bad Galaxy device night modes used to be. But well, I still think the OnePlus 13 is doing a better job in terms of the way I prefer my night mode. But then you see, when it comes to the ultra-wide camera, now I feel like the S25 Ultra is the one pulling ahead and it's kind of playing to my personal tastes. Now obviously I can only speak to the kind of photos that I prefer. You can see for yourself and judge for yourself exactly what you want. Maybe you prefer brighter shots, and then, at least for the ultra-wide camera, the OnePlus 13 would be the one to go for. Because the S25 does seem to be giving us much darker shadows, much more natural looking night mode shots, which, as you might know already, I appreciate the hell out of it. But once again, it is not 100% consistent with that. There are some shots at the end, as you can probably tell, it doesn't look quite as natural with the night mode. It looks a little brightened, over brightened I should say, while the OnePlus is kind of trying to maintain things now, so it definitely goes a little back and forth here and there, as you can probably tell. So I don't personally think you could go wrong with either of these, but let's be honest. Xiaomi 14 Ultra does night mode way better than both of these two phones combined, because that phone's night mode is by far the best there is. Now, if you don't believe me, I've made camera comparisons for both phones with the Xiaomi 14 Ultra. Check it out, links are in the description. Now, you might think that's a shameless plug, but I'd argue that I'm just spreading God's honest truth over here. But let's take a look at the 2x zoom. So at night, 2x zoom is kind of interesting in the approach. The S25 as usual is kind of brighter as opposed to the OnePlus 13. And so naturally I prefer how the OnePlus looks. But of course, cropping all the way in, it's plenty obvious that the S25 Ultra is taking a very different approach. It is smoothened out all the way to hell and back. And so, in a way, yes, it's very processed. But on the other hand, if you look at the OnePlus 13, you'll notice that the S25 Ultra does not have any of the noise and the grain and even some of the sharpening artifacts that the OnePlus 13 does. So, I would say both are similar, but it's like they are driving in the same direction but in different lanes. Moving on, of course, we've got 3x, so I think it's beyond obvious that the 3x is not going to turn out particularly good on the S25 because it's not a good sense after all. And well, the colors are horrendous, and you just look at the night sky, look at how horribly unnatural it looks on the S25. And just as expected, when we crop in, yes, the OnePlus 13 does have some processing and artifacts, but it is significantly better as opposed to anything the S25 Ultra can produce in this case. But then we have 5x now. Here's the deal, once again the colors are really off. I genuinely do not appreciate that weird night sky that we are getting. OnePlus, just because of that, would pull ahead in my opinion, but of course we are trying to test our details here, so let's crop in. And yes, despite some sharpening and processing still being present, the S25 does have more detail preservation overall, but the fact is this, the OnePlus image looks so much better that even with less detail, I'd still pick that any day of the week. So with that said, we are at the end of this comparison, and look, I don't know about you, but I can tell you right now, I think the S25 Ultra is nowhere near worth that massive price tag, especially like if you're thinking in terms of cameras, in terms of photography, it's not even close. The OnePlus 13 being as inexpensive as it is, as opposed to the S25 Ultra comparatively, well, its photography experience is worth a lot more in that regard. Now yes, one could say maybe the OnePlus 13 is performing exceptionally well. Whatever the case, at the end of the day, it is performing really well, and just how close you can get, if not better, in terms of the experience that you can have on the OnePlus 13 as opposed to the S25 Ultra, it's a big deal in my opinion. It is massive, the fact that the OnePlus can pull something like this. Yes, it has a lot of problems, without a doubt. It's got horrible selfies, it's got the whole scam situation going on with the macro. There's problems, obviously, both phones have a lot of problems. But at the end of the day, the OnePlus 13 is producing images that are worth more than its price tag, metaphorically speaking. Or was it figuratively speaking? Whatever the case, I do hope you guys enjoyed, found this helpful, because that's the whole point after all, and I'll see you guys sooner with more. Cheers.